There we go. Hey, welcome to Fireside Technique. My name is Jake Meeks. This is,
Chris Fitzgerald.
Oh, yeah, that's right. This is the world famous Chris Fitzgerald. You may know him from photographing tons of half-naked chicks.
That's true.
You may know him from photographing fully naked dudes. True?
Okay, that's true.
But today, he's going to tell us how to take photos of fresh tattoos, which is, everyone knows is a huge challenge. I'll start, because I know something, and then he'll sound smarter than me. Here's what I do first. So the biggest deal with a fresh tattoo is shininess. Swollen, red, shiny, glistening. What else can I say that means the same thing? Throbbing tattoos.
Right.
Red, throbbing tattoos. So here's what I do. As soon as I finish the tattoo, if you use something like Bactine, which I do, anything that's like a topical antiseptic, I will soak a few paper towels in it and just place them on the tattoo and let them sit while I break everything down. And I intentionally break down very slowly to force the person to sit there for a long period of time and just let the redness come out and let the fire come out of it. At the end of that, I'll wipe it down with a little soap and water, and then I will blot it dry to the point that they are grimacing. I'll get it super dry. A dry wipe and dry wipe on top of my dry wipe. That seems to make a big difference to me as far as getting the redness out.
Right.
And then now for you, how do you approach lighting, background, anything that you think is important? Let's start with the light.
Okay.
Because I've got Sean. You want to spin and show what we're using here real quick? I've got these soft boxes, and I'll put a link in the show notes or whatever you call these, the little description, and let you know where I got these. They were super cheap, cowboy lighting or something like that. I use them to tattoo with as well. They kind of give a nice even light. I put them on either side of me, and I really like them. So one thing I noticed as far as lighting is whenever I dropped it and put it kind of more at the level of the tattoo instead of up like they are now, I tend to get less glare. Does that make sense, or does it not?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the angle that you hold your camera as well. So if you're and the part of the body that it's on. So if you're down low and you're shooting something kind of like a cylinder, like an arm, that kind of makes sense. It's going to depend on a lot of different things, and sometimes it's just how you move the camera up and down. If you can see a glare, and you can put your hand maybe in front of it, like cast a shadow basically, sometimes that can knock the glare off too. But what you're saying, I mean, you're getting the glare from the wetness or from the A&D, and then so what you're saying is really valuable as far as pulling that redness out and then drying it as much as you possibly can in the soap and water, breaking down the oil base of the A&D.
Right.
So those things will get your glare out as well. As far as the lights go, he's got two lights with an even light source that are both daylight balanced at around 5500K. And then he's also bought the same for his ambient room light as well. What a softbox does is it shoots light forward, but also bounces it backwards into a reflective surface, and then makes it more of a diffuse light. So you're not getting that hard, bright spotlight effect. And so that really flatters your subject. You know, that's very similar to a window. You know, people sitting in front of a window look very nice. It's very wrapping light. And that's what a softbox does, is it kind of mimics that. The closer your light source is, the more it will wrap around the object. So the further away it is, the harder it will get. That's not to say that you can't move the light back further and then turn the light up. Sometimes that gives you a better result. But generally, the closer the light is, the softer it wraps, which is, you wouldn't actually think that.
Yeah.
You would think the opposite.
You would. Let me just throw out a couple of things that I've been told by other tattooers that seem like they're just kind of invented to me. I had someone tell me that to get as far away as I could from the subject and zoom in optically as far as I can, not getting into digital zoom. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
So that I allow more of the room light in or something. Does that make any sense to do, or would I rather be closer to the subject?
It sort of depends. I mean, that gets into optics. So if you're zooming in Are you saying zooming in with your body?
With your with the zoom.
Okay, the
like
zoom.
using the zoom on the camera
Gotcha.
as far as you can. Like mine will zoom to a certain point, and then it will turn to like a digital zoom. You can see that it transitions from
Digital zoom is just double.
Yeah, so
So
at least I
in
was
your sensor, basically. Okay, so yeah, optical zoom. So the more you zoom in, then the less you're going to get of the background. So that gets into aperture, basically. So, so without getting too technical, some zoom lenses will throttle your aperture. The more
aperture meaning
aperture is the intensity of the light. So how much light is getting onto the frame or the sensor. And then shutter speed is the duration of time that it allows the light to enter.
Right.
So it's duration and intensity, basically.
Yeah. So with aperture, when that shutter opens, aperture is controlling how wide the shutter opens, how much light is coming into it. And
So yeah, so on typical cameras, like your higher end cameras with a fixed lens, it's usually like 2.8 on the way to 21 or 22 or something like that.
Okay.
So 2.8 is it's opposite. Like the higher the number, the smaller the aperture, which means you get a bigger focal plane.
Okay.
So if this is my tattoo here and I'm shooting at like f/18, f/16, then I'm going to get focal information this far forward and then maybe twice as far back.
Okay.
And so then if I've got this junky room, then I'm going to get all the junk and clutter behind it.
Okay. And the lower that number is, the less of that junk behind it.
Right. And having like zooming in from far away, that actually is another way to create that same technique.
Gotcha.
And it's not as effective, but it will work on cheaper cameras.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That
it kind
makes
of blows out the background.
So for our purposes, for shooting tattoos close up, we would rather have a lower number on the aperture.
You would.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're shooting on a flat plane, like I'm shooting this, you could set it to 4.5 or 5.6, and then adjust the shutter speed accordingly, and then you're going to get this as your main focal point, and then it'll start to fade out and blur the background. And you can do this too. Like if you're staring at your own hand, the background sort of blurs gently.
Right.
And so an aperture basically mimics what your eye does.
Gotcha.
And the way I remember it is big number, big picture. So f/20, f/22, you're getting the biggest amount of focus available. Small number, small picture, 2.8 into the ones, you're getting a very small focal plane.
Okay. All right. And so that actually helps, because it's not, on most cameras, it's not marked aperture and shutter speed. It's marked whatever. It's marked f-stops. And the other one is the other one ISO? Or is that something completely different?
So ISO mimics what old film used to do, and it's sensitivity of film. It's like an international standard, ISO, or I think ASA is another way to say it. But you can mimic film, so that gives you an extra stop. When we talk about a stop is maybe the difference between 100th of a second and 200th of a second. So it's just one movement up the ladder, or the difference between like a 5.0 and a 5.6 or something like that.
Okay.
So ISO usually is set at 100, and then every time you go up to 200, 400, 800, you're getting an extra more sensitivity basically on the sensor. So that's good and bad. And most cameras now can go up to 1,000 pretty comfortably. And then give you, so in a room like this, if maybe you only have the ambient light, you wanted to shoot at 1,000, it would give you a lot of sensitivity.
Okay.
However, it's going to give you a little bit of grain too, and some color distortion as well sometimes.
Okay.
So that's a thing to think about.
So as a general rule for tattooers that don't want to get too technical and don't want to be photographers and probably don't have super high-end cameras, some of them are probably using their phones, but if you were taking a photo of a fresh tattoo up close, you don't want the background in it, so you're going to go with a lower ISO, and your shutter speed, your starting point on that will be just dependent on room,
your aperture, and depending on the ambient light in the room.
Okay. So the best thing to do is just to kind of play around with the two.
Right. So your camera usually has an A setting, which is aperture priority, and that way you can control the aperture, and the camera will control the shutter speed.
Okay.
That can be good and bad. So that makes you only think about one thing. But the camera, being dumber than you, may put it at a 40th of a second or a 20th of a second, and that's really hard to hold that still.
Okay.
So think about that. Anything under 80th of a second is pretty tough to hold still.
Okay.
I mean, at least for me anyway.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I would think about. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask if I'm erring on the side of caution, maybe I'm not getting the best photos, and I'm messing with those two settings. That's what I've been doing. I have no idea what I'm doing really. I set it on manual and I play with those two settings until I get something that looks pretty reasonable to me. Something that it looks like I can manipulate in Photoshop or in one of my apps to make it look nice. Do I want to err on the side of underexposed or a little darker or a little lighter in my photograph? Is it easier to add light or to take away light when you're in post production or whatever you want to call it?
I think it's easier to take away, personally.
Okay.
I think if you get some really blown out highlights, then you're screwed.
Okay.
So if you're getting the really bad glares, I would take multiple photos, kind of work around your object and see if you can pull one out in post. If you've got a glare that you just can't control, I would try to work around it, stand in front of your light, just kind of play with different things. But yeah, if you have that white hot highlight, then there's really nothing you can do.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you want to get it as light as you can to avoid the highlights, or would you rather go darker?
No, I would say go a little bit darker and then back it off. If you're working with it in post, then you can back it off a good 2-3 stops sometimes. I don't want to say all the time, but you've got a pretty good leeway with digital photography. So.
That's kind of what I've noticed just in playing. I've done both ways. I tend to go through and just take a dozen photos all over the place, from way overexposed to way underexposed, and try to get a lot in between. And then I'll go in when I have some time and play with them in even in just Instagram's little settings, not in the filters, but when you go in and you just adjust brightness and contrast and all that, I'll go in and play with them in that. And I've found that whenever they're a little darker, I can usually lighten them up and saturate them a little bit and make them look like the tattoo really does. And I guess that's the point, is we're not trying to trick anyone. You really what you're trying to do is show what the tattoo really looks like, not trick anybody into thinking your tattoos are better than they are.
Right.
Okay. One last thing on lighting, temperature of lighting. Cooler light is better or worse than warm light, or just a neutral light like this is.
Neutral, always better. And you can look at photos and kind of tell. So if it's too orange, then you're shooting under usually like a fluorescent or like a compact fluorescent or a halogen light. It can be too green. Neutral is always better. I know that you don't always have control of that situation.
Right.
Yeah. I'd say a lot of shops have fluorescent lighting.
A lot of shops have fluorescent
It's
lighting.
probably going to green, yeah.
Right. Now, this camera that Sean's actually shooting on right now is what I've been using to photograph with. It's a Canon G16, and it actually it's pretty fancy. It has a lot of settings that allow for different lighting. So you can put it on the tungsten light. Yeah, it has a setting for tungsten, or a setting for whatever, nighttime, or a fluorescent setting, and you can play with those. I don't tend to use them that much. What I did was intentionally went and made all of the lighting in my studio the exact same, and I tried to get the most neutral light that I could. But if your shop doesn't have that, then maybe those settings. And that's not an expensive camera. I mean, it's probably like $400 or so now. It's a couple of years old.
Yeah, and the auto white balance is typically okay, especially if you're dealing with a mixture of light sources, which a lot of if you have an old halogen bulb next to an old CFL and a new CFL, they're all different colors. So auto white balance maybe but your best bet. But you can also, it should be able to, as you click the white balance, it should change the color on your screen, and you can take a look. And then when you see it next to each other, you'll really see oh, this is blue.
Yeah.
I can definitely see it's blue, and this is definitely orange. And then you find the one that's the most natural.
Right. Cool. Well, hope that helps. Chris is going to podcast with us later on, so I don't know which is coming out first. Probably this.
Yeah, we're going to drop this on this week.
Okay.
Right, we'll split up, because the only thing I have left is Alabama.
Okay, cool.
So we'll split up.
Either way, we're going to do a podcast with Chris, so whether this comes out before or after, make sure you check it out. We're not going to talk all about photography. We're going to talk a little bit more about being a freelance artist and how to quit your day job and draw pictures all day. Thanks.
Oh yeah, thank you.